Hello, my name is Caleb Lopez, and I'm Chief Investment Officer at University Wealth Advisors, LLC. Today, we're going to be discussing the top 5 retirement mistakes that we see university employees make and what you can do to avoid them. Quick disclaimer, our firm is an independent registered investment advisory firm. We are not affiliated with any specific higher education employer or any specific institution, and we do not represent ourselves as any of our custodial partners. Again, our firm is an independent financial planning and wealth management firm, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means in the context of planning for retirement here shortly. So your retirement plan, it's either going to be a 7-figure opportunity for you, or it's going to have some missed potential therein. We found that universities in Michigan specifically have some of the best retirement plans available. Very generous matches, great investment choices, strong custodians like TIA and Fidelity. However, a lot of times what we see is that employees or participants do not fully understand how to maximize each area of their retirement plan, which could lead to tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, in missed wealth and missed opportunity along your career. So what we want to do is highlight the 5 areas that we see people make mistakes on the most. And hopefully by the end of today, you'll have some insight gathered on how you can apply these to your personal situation. Mistake number 1 is assuming that the basic retirement plan through your employer is enough for the entirety of your retirement. I've heard it many, many times. People say, oh, I have my retirement through my employer, or I have a retirement plan through my university. And that's great. However, when you go to retire, just having the basic retirement plan does not make any guarantee that this is enough to cover your personal living expenses throughout the whole of your retirement. At institutions like University of Michigan, Michigan State, Western Michigan, you'll have what's called a defined contribution plan, not a defined benefit plan. So this is different from the pensions of old that were typically associated with state employment at a higher education institution. So, for example, if you were to hold the same position you hold at a medical center, let's say in Ohio, you may be entitled to a state pension. But if you're employed at a Michigan university, like University of Michigan, Western Michigan, you will have their retirement plan, which is defined contribution plan. This means it's based on how much you save, how your investments perform, and ultimately how you would like to withdraw money when you do retire. So you cannot assume that just because you have the basic retirement plan, that is necessarily going to be enough to, make sure you reach your retirement goals when you do decide to retire. Especially if you're relatively high income, it's possible that you may need to enroll in other savings options in order to live the lifestyle you want to live when you retire. That leads us into mistake number 2, which is ignoring the 457B plan. So let's say you say, okay, great, I agree. I can't just rely on the basic retirement plan option that the university provides me. I need to enroll in some kind of supplemental savings. It would be very, very wise for you to look at and consider the 457B plan, especially if you value flexibility and if you potentially would like to retire early. The reason being is because the 457B plan that you're, entitled to enroll in as a public employee university member, it actually does not have the same restrictions that other retirement plans have in the university system. For example, if you enroll in the supplemental 403B, you cannot withdraw funds from that account until you reach age 59 and a half. But if you wanted to retire early, you would be, in somewhat of a pickle because you have these funds that are tied up. You can't access them without receiving a 10% penalty, even though you've been diligent in saving for many, many years. The 457B actually avoids that 10% penalty altogether, and you can make penalty-free withdrawals when you retire, no matter what age that is. They may not be tax-free unless you've, contributed money in a Roth capacity, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, but they would be penalty-free, which is great. So, more and more often I see people in higher education typically tend to work longer than shorter. And I think it's a function of the mental benefit that people get out of this type of work or this line of work that they're in. However, if you did want to retire early and you do value flexibility, it would be a mistake to ignore at least considering if a 457B plan contribution makes sense in your financial and retirement plan. Now, another big mistake that we see is overpaying for high investment fees within your retirement plan through the university. The really nice thing is that when you're an employee, your faculty at a large institution, your investments are going to have multiple different options through your plan custodian, which in this area is typically going to be TIAA or Fidelity. The problem becomes when you either talk to one of the representatives or you choose some investments on your own, you may be choosing higher than necessary fees, or investments rather that have higher than necessary fees. And the reason being is twofold. So, number one, if you do it yourself, you may just not be aware of what fees are in the investments you're choosing. And, if there's another fund that has comparable or lower fees for the same performance. Another big thing that we see is that when people talk to reps at TIA and Fidelity, usually they recommend them proprietary products that have higher fees than an alternative. And the reason being is because that's how those representatives and that's how those companies get paid by and large. So if you evaluate the investments you're holding for fees, oftentimes you can cut your investment fees by half or even a quarter, depending on what you had already been enrolled in. So again, we see some of these higher cost mutual funds and some of the proprietary products at TIA and Fidelity, along with some of these annuities that can tend to be fairly expensive if you look at them internally. So what we would recommend to avoid this is check what you were invested in and how much it costs. That would be expressed as an expense ratio. And then ultimately get a fee review with a fiduciary advisor like myself, with a fiduciary firm like University Wealth Advisors. We can help talk you through how to save money on fees. Mistake number 4 really goes back to what we talked about with the 457 and whether you contribute Roth or pre-tax contributions to your supplemental retirement plan. If you don't evaluate whether Roth makes sense for you, you could end up creating for yourself a very large tax bill when you do reach retirement. Now, this does not mean that it always makes sense to contribute to Roth, and this is not tax advice. So, definitely consult with a CPA, a tax planner. But you are actually able to make both pre-tax and post-tax contributions in your retirement plan. So what that means is you have the option to either not pay tax on the money you contribute now, or you can pay tax now in the trade-off being that you don't have to pay taxes in the future, and on any of the gains that those investments may have made. This is really something that we find as wealth management advisors that brings a lot of value to the clients that we work with because it really shows the difference between a generic one-size-fits-all plan and really tailoring a tax strategy when it comes to your investments to you as the individual. Whether or not you make several $100,000 a year, or maybe you make $80,000 a year at the university, that's really going to determine what type of contributions you should make and in what percentages you should mix if you're going to use, as we've mentioned, tax diversification. So really what you want to do when it comes to determining how you contribute is, like we say, where you save matters just as much as how you save. And you want to plan across multiple years and multiple tax brackets, not just for the current tax year you're in. You're going to be paying taxes throughout your entire life, for better or for worse. So you want to make sure that you are ethically and legally setting up your estate, your wealth in order to be tax efficient. Again, not an accountant, not a CPA, so that is not tax advice. But part of the financial planning wealth management process is making sure that we're making tax efficient investment decisions. Finally, the fifth mistake that we see employees at universities make is not having a decumulation strategy. Most of the time when you're working, you're very, very focused on accumulation. How are we saving money? How are we saving money in investment fees? How are our investments performing? Are we saving money in taxes? But then, there's going to become a day when you're going to decide, look, I don't want to work anymore. And at that point, you're going to have a big bucket of money. This goes back to what we talked about with mistake number one and the basic retirement plan maybe not being enough. You do not get, when you're employed with a public university in Michigan, a guaranteed pension or amount of money you get to live on each month. So how you decumulate and how much you decumulate per year actually is up to you. And this is another area where working with an independent fiduciary advisor can be very, very beneficial. How much do you spend per year? If you spend that much, how long is your money going to last you? Are there other things that you can do in order to make your money stretch further or to take more over the course of your lifetime? This is a very, very important piece of retirement, which is often overlooked, which is not just getting to the point where you're ready to retire, but actually how do we retire in a way which is going to be flexible and actually, specific to you and your goals. This also is another piece that would layer in with estate planning, especially if you have children or you have beneficiaries you'd like to leave your wealth to. So, how do the spending decisions you make when you're retired affect the next generation? That is something that having a decumulation strategy can address, and something that a lot of people don't really focus on until they've got to a point where they're ready to make those decisions and they feel underprepared. So that would be a mistake and an oversight that we would say, really working with a fiduciary advisor, that would be very, very beneficial in this situation. So those are some of the mistakes that we see people make. What action steps could you take this month in order to make some of those things actionable? Well, the first thing is to do a review of your contributions, tax types, and amounts in your employer HR portal. For University of Michigan, that's Wolverine Access. Michigan State, I forget the name, but they're all going to have a proportion or a similar type of system that you can go in and check your contributions. You can increase or start contributions to supplemental plans if you feel like you need to save more money in order to be on track for retirement. You can also go into either your Fidelity or TIAA account and review your investment options. But ultimately, I would say that all of those would be most beneficial if you do them with an advisor. And the reason being is because advisors know for what things to look for that, unless this is your field of study, you may not know what to look for. So we would suggest scheduling a personal review where we can go through, how much are you saving? Are you going to be on track? And are you making any of these mistakes that can be remedied so that you can have potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars more when you do go to retire? Again, our firm is a boutique wealth management and financial planning firm. We specialize specifically in higher education. So our advisors are all trained in the investment, legal, tax, pension, benefit considerations that affect specifically public universities and those here in the state of Michigan. We also deploy and implement financial planning. As we've discussed, are you on track for retirement? If you save, an extra $1,000 a month, how will that affect your retirement when you do decide to retire? All of those questions can be modeled out and answered with financial planning. Now, really what we focused on today are going to be the investment or retirement considerations. But as we've kind of touched on, that is going to be one piece of an overall wealth management plan. So you'll have your investments, but you'll also have your legal plan and risks associated with that, and a tax plan and risks associated with that. With working with an independent advisor, you can merge all of those aspects of your finances so that you have one comprehensive plan where you're not missing anything because you've created kind of a fragmented approach to your finances. Again, I'm not an attorney or an accountant, but we work closely with attorneys and accountants with our clients in order to create a greater benefit for them in their financial plan and in their wealth management plan. Again, I'd like to emphasize that we are not affiliated with a specific employer, and we don't represent ourselves as representatives of our custodial partners. Thank you so much for viewing this webinar. If you are interested in discussing your financial plan and your wealth management plan with an independent fiduciary advisor, I would recommend scheduling an appointment with us. It's a free, no obligation consultation where we can discuss some of these ideas and how they apply specifically to your situation. You can reach me at clopez@universitywealthadvisors.com, or you can text and call 330-417-8171. Thank you so much again for viewing this webinar. I look forward to helping you create wealth.